Before we go on and walk through this whole thing, I want to point out a couple of notation things in the chart. If you take a look at the second line, you'll notice that in measure 4, there's a bracket over that measure with a number 1, and then that measure ends with the familiar repeat sign that we've seen before. That means that we play through up to that point and then repeat back to the beginning. You'll see at the beginning there's the opposite bracket. So now we're going through and it's our second time through. Well, when you come to that measure with the number 1, you're going to skip it and go on to the next measure, which is marked number 2 and number 3. We call this a first ending, where the number 1 is, and a second ending, where the number 2 is. Our second and third endings are the same, but this is something that we use when you have a cycle that repeats, and on the second repetition, the cycle ends differently than it did the first time. In this case, it's that instead of going back to the F from the G chord, we remain on the G to move into the B section, next part of the song. The B section begins on line 3. We have bar of F, 2 bars of C, 2 bars of F, bar of D, and a bar of G. Now, when I played through just now, I used 2 different forms of G. I used the bar chord on one, I used the open chord on the other. In this instance, you notice the different sounds, or you may have noticed the different sounds. It's still a G chord. Either one works. You may find sometimes when you're playing through a song like this that has repetitive cycles that you do mix up the forms that you use. Of course, the purpose of the exercise is to work with the sliding bar chord. So every time the G and F are going together, then you want to make sure that you're using that same bar formation and moving from the first fret to the third fret. So our form, as we walk through the chart, is to start at the beginning. You play through bar 8, repeat back to bar 1, play through to bar 7, skip bar 8, and replace it with the last measure of that line where we hold the G chord. Then we go on through the next 8 bars. You'll notice at the end of the 4th line is another repeat sign. We now go back to the very beginning again because that's where we see the opposite bracket, the repeat facing in. So we play through those 7 bars, skip bar 8 again, replace it with the next bar, which is our third ending. And this time, as you continue through the next 8 bars, you come to that repeat sign and you continue. So you ignore the repeat when you've played through that part the second time. The end of it introduces a syncopated rhythm like this. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and. Notice, quarter, quarter, 8th note, 8th. There's an 8th rest in there. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Now, I want to call your specific attention to the first 2 measures of those last 2 lines. Notice we have quarter note, 8th, 8th, 8th rest, and another 8th note tied to that next downbeat. There's an effect that we're going for here, which is ba, 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 ba. Now, some of the time, even as I was playing that through, I still struck the downbeat of the second measure even though it's tied. 2, 3, and 4, and 1. But you hear how that last upstroke was really strongly emphasized. 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1. Or 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1. See how the effect wasn't really all that different. And then in that measure, the rest of it is an upstroke 8th note on the and of 2, followed by 2 more 8th notes and a quarter note. The F chord is meant to come in on beat 3. Here's those 2 measures. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4. But because it can be kind of challenging to squeeze and move that chord that quickly while you're concentrating on this syncopated strum, if that 8th note before we move back to F ends up being more of sort of a percussive click or even just a transitional sound, you don't sacrifice anything. notice that I hit the upstroke, and what you heard was really more muted strings than a ringing chord, but we still maintain the momentum. So now, I'm going to go ahead and play through with the track again, and notice those syncopations, and also notice how we follow the form. So I would definitely suggest that you very specifically follow the chart and keep track of first ending, second ending, and so forth, and where we are in the map of the song. So here's Shake It again. One last thing I want to call to your attention here. This particular track is real heavy on what we might call the backbeat. That's counts 2 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. One of the great things about bar chords is that since we don't have any open strings, when we release the pressure, we're muting everything. And so we can make use of that to create an emphasis on the backbeat, and that percussive sound sort of imitates a snare drum. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So having that released, muted sound on beat 4 really adds a lot of rhythmic energy. And you might have noticed as well that there is quite a bit of transitional stuff going on here where I'm releasing a chord while I'm still strumming. And I've mentioned this sort of thing before. When you have a steady driving rhythm, the ear is really drawn to that and the illusion of motion that it creates. Plus, your ear remembers the chord that it just heard. So the little bit of sound in between that's not that same chord is something that goes by and doesn't really sound out of place. It's actually very much the sound of this kind of playing. And I think you may have also noticed that I was mixing up some of the rhythms here. You can pick one rhythm and play it. The simplest thing to do would simply be 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1. So notice 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1. But you can try a number of the syncopated rhythms from the syncopated rhythm exercise, and you'll find that many of them work. And if you listen closely to what I was playing, you'll notice that I was using a variety of them. Again, going back to that idea of rhythmic variation within the same basic beat structure. So there's a whole lot here. I think you can see just how important this is and just how many other places these ideas are going to come up. You may find holding all those bar chords very challenging, but just like with every other hurdle, work your way through it, you'll get there. Keep practicing. See you at the next lesson.